have to pass now to to Professor Harman and present her own presentation. Thank you, Edward.
Okay. I want to thank the sponsors to making it possible for me to be here today. I came a long way, as Edward wanted to be here too, but I'm glad I could come and talk to you. I'm thankful that Edward was able to speak to you a little bit about child abuse first and how parental alienation is a form of child abuse. And the protection of the child is most important, so it's imperative that we understand the ways that parental alienating behaviors harm children. Now I'd like to build on his talk and talk, I'd like to build on this talk by arguing that parental alienating behaviors are also what is considered intimate partner violence. This is an argument that I've been making for a long time, and it's driven much of my research in this area. Now, we could exclusively focus on the behaviors of the alienating parent towards the child and their associated outcomes. However, that only captures part of a much larger picture. In a recent paper that I published with Edward Crook, that he referred to in his talk, we stated that parental alienation or parental alienating behaviors are a form of family violence because they can be both child abuse and intimate partner violence. Therefore, family violence is an umbrella term that we use for these two forms of violence. I'm going to focus now mostly on intimate partner violence in my talk. When we think about intimate partner violence, we often think about intimate terrorism, where there's a powerful perpetrator of abuse who uses psychological and physically abusive behaviors to control and dominate the less powerful person. This type of abuse is not likely to be reciprocated. We might see some aggressive behaviors of the target of the abuse out of self-defense or anger, but the abusive behaviors are typically seen in the more powerful partner. And it's a larger strategy of that partner to maintain control of the other person. This form of intimate partner violence has predictable cycles of abuse, with increases in tension and strain, followed by aggressive behaviors, followed by a honeymoon phase, and the cycle repeats. The perpetrators of intimate terrorism often have severe personality disorders and/or a history of abuse in their family of origin. A more common form of intimate partner violence is called situational couple violence. This violence is used by people to put an end to conflict. Both partners typically have similar levels of power, and they use aggression as a way to stop an argument or conflict, such as pushing or throwing something at the person to get them to stop yelling. This form of violence is not predictable. It's usually comes about when there's escalation of an argument or the person's upset or tired. And it's often born out of poor communication skills, conflict resolution skills, or anger management problems. The perpetrators of situational couple violence are comparatively healthier than perpetrators of intimate terrorism, and they fall within a normal range on personality measures. Now, the distinction between these two forms of violence is very important to make because it has implications for our understanding of why people perpetrate these forms of violence and what we need to do about it. So, which of these types of violence are parental alienating behaviors? You can probably guess. This is the question that I've devoted a lot of time trying to understand, and I will argue here that it's intimate terrorism, and here's why. Researchers and mental health practitioners have long documented personality disorders among parents who engage in severe parental alienating behaviors. These parents often have narcissistic personality disorders, borderline personality disorders, and/or psychopathic tendencies. In my own work, we're seeing other characteristics that are known as the dark tetrad of personality: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and sadism. Researchers have also found evidence of intergenerational transmission of parental alienation. This means that some parents who are victims or perpetrators of parental alienating behaviors were raised in homes where they were childhood victims of parental alienation. In other words, they were abused as children and are now reliving the abusive dynamic as adults. Next, we know that there are predictable patterns of parental alienating behaviors. Approaching court dates increase claims of abuse. The introduction of a new romantic partner, spouse, or a half-sibling poses a threat to the alienating parent, resulting in increases in parental alienating behavior, perpetration, and intensity. Correlating behaviors to events such as this help us to contextualize and understand this violence, and it demonstrates that it's not random. The behaviors are predictable and intended to get and maintain control over the child and the targeted parent, particularly when the alienating parent's perceived control is being threatened. Finally, my own research shows that there are extreme power imbalances in families where there is parental alienation. These power imbalances are exacerbated by child custody practices that put primary custodial care into the hands of the preferred parent, leading to more serious parental alienation of the children from the targeted parent. In my research lab, we've been examining whether the power dynamics in families affected by parental alienation are equal, which would mean the families are like situational couple violence, or we look to see if they were unequal or imbalanced, which would be more like intimate terrorism. Using interdependence theory as our framework, we have been categorizing situations described by targeted parents. The data set were transcripts from nearly 80 interviews we conducted with parents who were the targets of parental alienation around the world. What we've looked at is the level of interdependence that each parent has with each other when they describe their experiences with parental alienation. And according to this theory, the more dependent a person is on someone for an outcome, the less power they have. And what we found lent support to our hypothesis that these families have notable power imbalances. Overwhelmingly, most of the parents described situations in which they were unable to influence the outcomes of the alienating parent. In addition, these parents have very little control over their own outcomes. They are completely at the alienating parent's mercy. This situation is called asymmetric dependence. And there are two pure variations of this type of dependence. One is where the more powerful person has all control and will try to erase the other person or push them out of their life entirely. The other is when the powerful person tells the other one to comply with them, to follow their orders, and if they don't, they're punished. The alienating parent has the allegiance of the child. They have their loyalty, and this gives them a lot of power. They have all the power and control, but yet that's never enough for them. Even when alienating parents have power, they keep doing things to maintain it, because they're constantly threatened to lose it. Obtaining all custody and controlling the targeted parent with gatekeeping behaviors is a goal for most parents who alienate their children. And giving them all custody does not stop parental alienation. Targeted parents are unable to reciprocate alienating behaviors in this situation. The children will use anything they say or do to justify pushing them away. The only recourse the targeted parent has is to help others help them, or get others to help them. They seek legal action to get more control in order to see their child. Another common situation described by targeted parents is called threat. Here, both parents are affected by the behaviors of each other, but one parent has more control over the outcomes and how they were divided up. This person could either act in ways that benefit both of them or only benefit themselves. In this case, a parent may be given temporary or permanent primary custody of the children, and the other parent is largely dependent on them to have a good relationship. This parent can either promote it and have a healthy relationship, or they can act selfishly and promote the allegiance of the child to them. In that case, the targeted parent has only two choices. One, they can watch the relationship with their children slowly deteriorate. Or they can threaten or challenge the powerful parent to act in the child's best interest to have a relationship with them. The threat will usually take the form of court action in order to get greater access to the child. Again, this parent has very little power. They cannot reciprocate the alienating behaviors that effectively, even if they wanted to. A third common situation described by parents is called chicken. This is named after the deadly game of two cars driving on a collision course towards each other. In this case, one parent will challenge the other, and the other parent has two choices. They can take the safe choice and swerve out of the way, in which will ensure their safety, but there are negative consequences, like being called a chicken or a coward. The other, more risky choice is to rise to the challenge. If the other parent swerves away, they win, and they're the victor. If they both continue straight, they face mutual destruction. This strategy is often used by alienating parents to gain control of the relationship and with the children, such as to get a custody advantage. They'll make false accusations of abuse. They'll provoke the other parent at parenting time exchanges. They'll take many actions against the targeted parent, and the targeted parent has to defend themselves. If they walk away, they risk losing everything, and the child is told that they were abandoned. If they defend themselves, that can also end badly, because third parties, observers, will think that they are just as responsible for the conflict. But to assume that the targeted parent is responsible for chicken is false. The alienating parent is trying to obtain control and to create a dynamic where they will have all of it. Now, I don't have time to cover the other situations that we've heard described by parents, but I can tell you that they are all imbalanced. Therefore, there's considerable support for the argument that this intimate partner violence is more like intimate terrorism than situational couple violence. Now, when parents are in distress, we use this term, you've seen this, other speakers mention this, child affected by parental relationship distress. It's a term in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual published by the American Psychiatric Association. And it characterizes how distress affects children. And there are 4 general situations described by Bill Burnett and colleagues, 2 of which are loyalty conflicts and parental alienation. Loyalty conflicts refer to when a child tries to have positive feelings for both parents, even though both parents are very hostile and angry towards each other. The child has divided loyalties. They're triangulated. They feel stuck in the middle and pulled in all directions. Loyalty conflicts commonly occur in divorced families, but they reflect a situational couple violence. These parents often can co-parent okay. They just have conflicts every now and then They do bad things that aren't great for the child, but this is not parental alienation. These families have more equal power, and they will sometimes put their own needs aside for the sake of their child. In comparison, parental alienation refers to the child's rejection or refusal to have a relationship with a parental figure for no justifiable reason. There's unequal power between the parents, with one having more power due to having the loyalty of the child, or they've been given primary custody. In this way, it's more like intimate terrorism. Now, what do we know about interventions for these two types of violence? They're very different because they're very different types of power. So when a family's labeled high conflict, typically they tell them to work it out, to go to mediation, to make nice, cooperate for your child. That will work for these families, the loyalty conflict families. They have more equal power. They are willing to put their own needs ahead of the child. They're not pathological. Okay? They don't have the personality disorders that are causing some of these problems. So in this case, you can use family counseling, psychoeducation, other types of approaches to help these families. But what about intimate terrorism? Do we ask victims of battery or bullying to sit into a room with their perpetrator and work it out? Do we tell them to find a way to cooperate with this person who's abusing them? No, we don't do that. But we unfortunately do that for parents who are being alienated from their children. So when there's parental alienation, we cannot ask parents to sit in a room and negotiate with each other. If you do, you're party to the abuse that's happening, and you're just as responsible for the outcomes in the child. To further make my point, I'm going to end by talking about a recent book chapter that I published with Mandy Mathewson. And we're going to look at the behaviors that alienating parents use to damage the relationship with their child and the other parent. And in the psychological bulletin paper I mentioned earlier that I published with Edward Crook, we outline all of the behaviors. And I can share that article with you if you're interested. And we mapped it on to child abuse and intimate partner violence categories. But for here, I'm going to simplify this. I'm going to simplify it and make it very simple for you. So this is a power and control wheel that may be familiar to some of you. It's used widely in the treatment of intimate terrorism. And so we adapted this wheel to understand the behaviors of alienating parents. And we made it gender neutral because this original wheel was designed with the perpetrator as male in mind. But with parental alienation, perpetrators are both men and women. They're equally likely to be perpetrators. And so we adapted this. We changed it. And we use these categories. They're not distinct. They overlap a lot. But I think it's a useful framework to understand what these parents are doing. And in the original wheel, we see here intimidation, coercion, and threats. We've altered this a little bit in our wheel. We have emotional abuse, isolation, using the children, using privilege, and economic abuse. And we added physical and sexual abuse. So excuse my graphic design skills. I'm not great with that. But you can see here an adapted wheel that we are using for these behaviors. And before I go over these, I want to emphasize that if a parent does one or a few of these behaviors, this does not make them an alienator. It's the consistent use of these behaviors and patterns of behaviors over time with the intent to harm the other parent that makes them parental alienating behaviors. Okay, so we're looking for clusters of behaviors over time with the intent to harm. So emotional abuse is the first category I will describe. It involves verbal aggression and emotional manipulation. And the aim of the emotionally abusive person is to humiliate, belittle, shame, and diminish self-worth. So here we see alienating parents saying horrible things about the targeted parent to make the child and others hate them. They will try to depict them as unsafe or unfit. And this form of abuse also includes verbal attacks of the targeted parent, often in front of the child. Alienating parents will use gaslighting techniques, which is when you present false information with the intent to make the person doubt their memories or their beliefs. Alienating parents are very good at distorting facts. They're very manipulative. And so they can take an innocent interaction and make it look very dangerous. For example, a targeted parent might engage in a tickling game with their child, and that is reinterpreted as sexual abuse. These mind games are very effective at damaging the child's love and respect for the targeted parent and turning others against the targeted parent. And over time, the child is brainwashed. And the parent will also do things to minimize the role of the targeted parent. They will tell the child to call them by their first name. They will change their last name. They will try to erase any significance of the targeted parent. Coercion includes a lot of different tactics designed to minimize the power of the victim and to control their behavior. Alienating parents are primarily motivated to maintain absolute control over those close to them. And so loyalty-inducing behaviors and the manipulation of others are used a lot to accomplish this goal. Alienating parents will indoctrinate an absolute belief system, and they will reinforce these beliefs with the child. They will discredit any view that's different than the one they have about the targeted parent. They will discredit any critical thinking skills the child engages in. In order to achieve control, the alienating parent will present themselves as the devoted and consistently stable parent, while at the same time they undermine the relationship between the child and the targeted parent. Complete loyalty is demanded from the child, and if the child does not adopt the alienating parent's belief system and demand unwavering allegiance, the child is punished or rejected. So the alienating parent will withdraw love and affection, belittle or shame the child, even physically punish the child, and reject them if they decide to have a relationship with the targeted parent. The child is coerced into an impossible position, and they have to comply or else they risk losing the relationship with the alienating parent, which in their mind is now the only relationship they have left. The alienating parent will also treat the child as an equal, giving them an unhealthy sense of power for their age, or treat them as a child younger than their own age to promote dependency. They will also block access to the child or lie and manipulate others on their behalf to harm the targeted parent. I'm going to be mindful of time, and I could go on and on about the behaviors these parents do, but to give you an idea.
Please do not. Please don't.
Okay, I could go, but I could do that over a break. But they use lots of threats and intimidation. They will stalk the targeted parent and have others stalk on their behalf. They will create fear in the targeted parent for their safety and the safety of their child. They will stage events to make it look like the targeted parent hurt them in public, even though they didn't. And so they will also just challenge them in every way possible and threaten with taking them to court, threaten them with accusations of abuse. Many, many behaviors to scare the targeted parent and keep them away. They will also use isolation, where they will isolate the child and the targeted parent from their social supports. They will isolate them from extended family members, school. They will take them out of school, move them to a new one, away from their peers. They will homeschool the child. They will move interstate or abduct the child and move them to another country. Alienating parents will also isolate the targeted parent from all their social network in order to take away their power. Alienating parents, most of all, will refuse to acknowledge the impact of their behavior, and they will not take responsibility for it. They will blame everyone except themselves. They will justify their behaviors by claiming that they are simply trying to protect their child from the other parent, and that the other parent's at fault for the child's rejection. The alienating parent will argue that they are the stable parent, they're the well-adjusted parent, and they will externalize the problem and blame the other parent for it. And they will often argue that their abuse is better than the alternative if they do acknowledge that they are acting badly. They will say, it's okay because I need to protect them from that more abusive person, even though their beliefs are not just substantiated. And of course, I've been talking a lot about the use of the children. We see them using children all the time as a weapon against the targeted parent. They have them spy on them, they encourage them to attack or verbally attack the targeted parent, destroy property, lie to authorities in order to get the targeted parent in trouble and away from them. They will neglect their child's needs. They will take them to doctors repeatedly to try to show that they are sick and they are the only ones who can take care of them, that the targeted parent is incapable of doing that, so that they can have the power to control everything about that child. We also see physical and sexual abuse that can happen. This is often the reason targeted parents leave their relationship. Mothers and fathers leave the relationship because of physical or sexual abuse. And unfortunately, then, they lose their children when they do this. And in these cases, the alienating parent will use physical intimidation and violence at parenting time exchanges in front of the child. They will often punish the child physically for showing any loyalty to the other parent. Alienating parents will also use their privileged role of primary custodial parent or preferred parental status to gain power over the targeted parent and the child. They will use stereotypes about being the better parent or the better provider and use that to bias third parties in their perceptions of the family. For example, mothers will say that they are the more nurturing parent, they're more caring than the father, and fathers might say that they are the better provider and that the mother is crazy. These are the strategies that are used to try to gain an advantage. Finally, we also see economic abuse. This is where parents will engage in financially abusive behaviors to harm the targeted parent financially so they don't have power. Many of these involve withholding money or children as a way to coerce the other person. They will create financial debt, delay court actions to rack up attorney fees. They will spend lots of money or steal money from that targeted parent in order to make them incapable of doing anything. Okay. So in summary, parental alienating behaviors are a form of family violence that could be characterized as child abuse and intimate partner violence. And I detailed for you here the specific form of intimate partner violence that parental alienating behaviors are, which is intimate terrorism. To better address this problem, we need a greater understanding of the kind of aggression, abuse, and violence that this is. Otherwise, we provide the wrong kind of services for families to make matters worse for the child's well-being. When there's physical or sexual abuse in a family, it is a child protection issue. My colleagues and I have been arguing that parental alienation needs to be treated as a child protection issue as well, with tailored interventions designed to minimize the abusive behaviors of the alienating parent. The most effective interventions we have for treating parental alienation treat this as child abuse and intimate partner violence. Finally, my colleagues and I have argued that a presumption of shared parenting could potentially mitigate some of the damage that alienating parents do. As long as both parents are normal and healthy and have shared custody and parenting time can provide the child with ample quality time with both of them And that has many beneficial outcomes for the child. And it can provide the child with more experiences with the less preferred parent that could negate or offset the negative things the alienating parent says, or the falsehoods that they try to tell the child about the other parent. Having time with the targeted parent can help the child combat this and mitigate it. It won't solve parental alienation, it won't stop it entirely, but it has the potential to minimize the effects of it on the child. And thank you.